is this going to? Let's call this commission of the ARPA strategy and outcomes the commission to order. Maybe we could go around real quick and just kind of introduce ourselves, even if you're not on there. I'm Tom Egan, supervisor.
Morris Cox, supervisor. Al Special, supervisor.
John Dale, County Executive.
Mike Collard, Acting Finance Director.
Kelly Hansen, District 26 Supervisor.
Tom Belcher, I guess I'm the only guy who's not a supervisor. I'm a former banker for US Bank, Associated Bank, and Demo Harris.
Tom Borchard, supervisor, District 3.
Fire Supervisor, Vice Chair, County Board.
Everybody's a supervisor?
Marion Dilling couldn't make it. We're still waiting on Nina. I got a couple of people to meet. Sure, I'm right fit. This is Tricia Rector from Go EC.
Chris, you want to sit up?
Yeah, you come up here and sit down.
I still want to take spot from.
Oh, you're good.
Oh, no problem at all.
Looks like the men only table. You-
Yeah, that's
I wasn't sure if you had more.
Mike, are you going to take over the role in discussion? On the commission on that then?
Sure. I just wanted to,
We want to open up for public comments?
Hold on. Does anyone from the public wish to speak? You want to state your name so we get it on record and everything, please?
Again, Kelly Hansen, District 26 Supervisor. I'm interested in this meeting because I have been made aware of two projects of people that want to possibly get ARPA funds. I think they're worthy causes, so I'm here to find out just exactly what is and is not of it or eligible for the funds, and then how I would go about advocating for them. And that's all I have.
Hopefully we can answer that question shortly.
we do have several people on Zoom. I would ask if anyone wishes to speak, perhaps they could raise their hand or alert me to that. From the chair.
Anyone on Zoom wishing to speak, raise your hand. Anyone on Zoom wishing to speak at this time? Not seeing any.
Oh, it doesn't look like.
Anyone else wishing to speak? That's 3 times, so we can move on from there. Okay. Mike, do you want to now go ahead and give the introduction, discussion, the role that's in front of us here with the ARPA money and what's in there and everything?
Sure, just as a real basic introduction, this commission was established by county board resolution in March 2022. Membership includes county board members and some citizen members, as well as the county executive. It includes the finance director as a non-voting resource or staff person, and provides for the commission, looking at the wrong one here, I'm sorry, to essentially make determinations about the needs of the county, collect requests for projects or use of the funds that are available, and to make recommendations to the county board. On tonight's agenda, we just really have discussion items. There will eventually be votes to submit things to the county board, but the final action on how to use the ARPA money would be up to the county board. But they certainly need this group to vet the projects, make sure, you know, matching up really what the top needs are, because there's a significant amount of money here, and obviously we want to use it in a way that's going to provide a lasting benefit to the citizens and taxpayers of the county. I think we'd all agree. In terms of what ARPA is the, let's see if I get the name right, American Rescue Plan Act, passed in 2021 by the federal government, provided $350 billion in payments to state and local governments throughout the country. It provides 65 of that $350 billion would be allocated to counties. So I did the math. If you divide that 65 billion by the proportion of national population that lives in Winnebago County, it comes to a little over 33 million. That's in fact what our allocation is, 33 million, let's see, 33,390,918, if I remember right.
Right.
Dollars, of which we've received half, which is 16.6 million, I believe. And the second tranche, or half of that, will be coming any day now. We've submitted our request. We're in line, waiting for that wire transfer. As far as today, I don't believe we have it yet, but it could come any day now. The money, funds we've received have been deposited in a separate fund, a separate banking fund, a money market fund with Associated Bank, our primary banker. So it's completely segregated from other county money. We do have to account for its use. But the federal government has provided for regulations. The final rule was just issued in April of this year about how the funds can be allocated by the governing body of the county, which would be the county board. I did pass out the probably the best overview I'd seen, which is something we got from the National Association for Counties. I think it's a real good overview of what the purposes of ARPA are and what's and I'm probably going to lead over into number 3 with the chairman's approval, unless you want to stop me and separate that.
Anyone have any questions of Mike as of right now?
What will be the process for submitting requests for funding?
So I have to report as the authorized representative with the Treasury Department. I have to report quarterly on the status of our projects.
Locally, within departments, committees, individuals, how would you do that?
I think that's more discussion for.
Oh, I'm
That's-
sorry, that's for the county.
Yes.
Okay,
Well, and it's kind of up to the commission. So that's why we need to discuss that.
all right, okay, I understand.
Mike, before you go any farther, are you taking notes today? for
Yes.
us? Okay, thank you.
I'd like to,
Go ahead.
yeah, me and, we sent this around, me and Chairman Egan had come into my office and I kind of wrote this up and we discussed it, just kind of a scope of the ARPA commission. Broken down line by line. I just want to do this today. So when we get together next time, maybe we can consider this, making it official, just to kind of give us a little bit of, I guess, guidelines to how, if we agree on what this commission should be doing. So this is just for you guys to take home and consider and think about before we get together next time. I think it lays out exactly the scope of what this commission should be pretty well. Be looking forward to any kind of feedback next time we get together.
Mike, you want to go on with?
All right, be glad to. So update regarding status of the county's SLFRF allocation and allowable uses of funds. So and I think I can summarize this fairly quickly because there's kind of a clear plan for what I would call the first phase of deliberations.
Could you let them know what the acronym stands for?
I was just going to. So ARPA stands for the America Recovery. I forgot the P was the American Rescue Plan Act. SLFRF stands for State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds. So ARPA in general is a huge piece of federal legislation. The SLFRF is the specific part of ARPA that provided us with the 33 million. So that's what the SLFRF is. As I said, the Treasury Department has issued regulations, the final rule in April, with a lot of detail about how the funds can be used. And so a lot of that is described in this resource booklet, this overview in general terms. But I think we're actually going to have a tremendous amount of flexibility, bottom line, as to how the money is used, because I'm going to go right to the key point. The regulations allow counties to use a certain portion of the revenue or of the funds as replacement for lost revenue. The theory of the legislation was that local municipalities, counties, et cetera, state governments as well, have lost revenue due to the pandemic, due to the shutdowns, due to people working from home, due to less sales tax revenue, whatever the source may be, the federal government made that assumption or that determination. And the original rule allowed us to take a significant portion of the funds as lost revenue. It's a real key distinction because we can treat the funds as replacing lost revenue, which frankly gives the board a lot more discretion, a lot more leeway on how and when to use the funds. So it's really the first key point. In April, they actually changed the rule significantly about lost revenue. And if you look on page 4 of that handout, down at the bottom, there's a little introduction to the idea of revenue loss allowance. And it says to the bottom right on that page, 70% of counties are now eligible to invest the entirety of their recovery fund allocation for general government services. So it can all be treated as lost revenue for 70% of counties. Are we one of them? The answer is yes. I've been through that calculation. There's some detailed rules on how to do that. It's not all lost revenue. You have to exclude federal revenue. You have to exclude some other sources of revenue. But according to my calculations, using the format and the rules the Treasury Department provides, which by the way, I don't think are really an accurate forecast of lost revenue, but it's what they say we can do. They assume, for instance, that we're going to have 5.2% increases in revenue every year. We don't get anything like that. It might be 1 or 2%, and that's cumulative over up to a 4-year period where you can count the lost revenue. So by my calculations, following their formulas, by about a month ago, we've consumed the 33.4 million in our ability to treat it as lost revenue. So the report for 2022 lost revenue will provide that. We're claiming it all as lost revenue. We have an option where we could claim 10 million as lost revenue without providing any calculations. Obviously, it's to our advantage to claim the entire amount. So I did pursue that option, claiming the whole amount as lost revenue.
So I need to ask you, do you have a calculation of our actual lost revenue? Did we lose money either in the last 2 years?
1 year it went down by about 1 to 1.5%, I think. I have that number. I just
Curious.
off the top of my head, it was between 1 and 2%, not 5.2. So regardless, there was some loss, but it didn't go up by as much as it did the previous year. Is really what we're looking at.
Do you avoid taking any grant money, that is it federal or state grant money, when you're figuring out the lost revenue within the confines of the finance itself, so that does not flow into gains, is what I'm saying. Because there are gains with every grant that we get in and hold.
Yes, and that's a good point. The regulations on how to calculate the lost revenue require us to exclude federal revenue. And that makes sense because the theory is there's more federal money coming our way because of the pandemic. We're not supposed to be measuring that. So to calculate the lost revenue, I created a spreadsheet. I tracked the revenue in each org or business unit we have in our accounting system. I then excluded or deleted all the orgs where federal revenue is. We don't generally try very hard to separate federal revenue sources from state and local agency, for instance, state revenue or state grants, including the ones where it's federal money passing through the state. There were some other categories we also had to exclude from the calculation. So just basically the non-federal revenue is what we're looking at. And federal revenue has been increasing. The non-federal revenue hasn't and wasn't before the pandemic by a very great amount, by as I said, 1 to 2% at most. So that leaves us with, sizable paper loss revenue that we claim.
My reason for asking is you get into social services, human services. And take a look at the amount of grants that are brought in and the mix and the length of time that the grants have, have to have the recovery time for recovering money from, from the state, we'll say, for a grant on whatever.
Mhm.
They very often go from budget to budget, folding in labor and benefits because of the amount of grant fluctuation and feedback from the grants that they would normally get.
Mhm.
It becomes more difficult, pool of money to really fight through. But what I guess what I was getting at before, is, how do you look at that?
Yeah, well, we're trying to exclude all that, and the regulations are not particularly onerous. If you look at this handout, for instance, from NACO that just came a week or so ago, if 70% of counties nationwide are eligible to claim the full amount, they're not going to quibble with us. We're probably a medium-sized county in the national picture of things, but won't be anything unusual about us making that claim. And there are some hoops to jump through. And so we do have to have projects set up. We have to report some things to the Treasury Department to indicate how we're claiming this money and what for. So once we determine that it's all capable or eligible to be treated as lost revenue, the theory is then if we lost revenue, we're just short of funding to fund our normal government activities, all the things the county does. So the regulations allow us to apply that money to almost anything. The list of things we can't apply it to is fairly short. There are some things we cannot apply it to, including we can apply it to money we've already spent. So we can't, these things are on page 5 of the handout. There's a very good summary of it. For instance, we can't show that we can't claim that any money we've paid into a pension fund, except, and this is a very good change in the rule, normal contributions to our state retirement system that we make in the normal course for our normal employee wages and salaries can now be counted. The original rule said those couldn't be counted. So that's a big help. Debt service payments cannot be used. We can't just park the money and use it in a rainy day fund, at least not directly, because we really can. So $1 is as good as another. So what we can use it for, that's a little bit higher on page 5, the right-hand column. General government services, any service typically provided by a government. So it could be our normal operations. We spend about $175 million a year. Construction of schools and hospitals may not apply, but road building and maintenance and other infrastructure costs. We spend, $10 million range in infrastructure costs at least a year. General government administration, staff and administrative facilities, police, first responders, public safety services. Doesn't specifically say human services types of programs, but those kind of things generally be included as well. What we do have to watch out for is not using the money and applying it to things where other grant revenue has been used, because that could, I have to do a little bit of research on that in some areas, but for instance, just as one obvious example, on a small scale child support department, we get base funding from the state of 66% of what their actual costs are. If we use ARPA money for that, then it's 66% of nothing, because we haven't paid, we actually incurred that expense to hire the child support people. So I do have to be careful, but to make sure we're not going to get ourselves tangled up. We have a lot of leeway because we can actually use a 4-year period. We're going back to 2020. So I'm pretty confident I can find fairly safe places to apply the lost revenue. That won't get us in any trouble. That will equal or exceed the 33.39 million allocation. So those things will have to be collected. We'll have to file complicated reports, detailed reports on what categories of expense we're claiming as how we're applying the lost revenue funds to general government services. But we can do all that this year. It'll have to be approved by the county board. And once we do that, then we have a pot of money. Because we're really replacing money we've already spent, and we can then take the money we already had spent, just do the accounting, and we still have the money in the ARPA account to spend. So that's, I think, a fairly obvious plan to start. It will need approval of this commission and of the county board. I'm not ready to write that resolution yet because we haven't compiled the various expenses that we could best apply it to. And we need to get that second tranche done as well, the second half of the funds. But before too long, we should have that finalized and be able to submit that and have the county board pass a resolution declaring that that's how that's how our lost revenue replacement funds of 33 million are going to be applied. But that will be the initial application. Then we still have the pot of actual money that can be used. And that's, again, really without strings at that point. We've cut the strings, we've jumped through the hoops on the lost revenue side of things. So I think that gets us very much where we want to be. Doesn't answer the end question of what to do with 33 million. But just kind of recognition that by jumping through a few hoops and taking advantage of the way they wrote the regulations on this, and not to do anything unusual, be what everyone else is doing at this point. I'm sure I've discussed it with our auditor and with our bonding company, and so they don't see a problem with handling it this way. They've talked to many other accountants about financial matters. So but it looks like a great way to handle it, kind of the obvious way to free it up so that the board, with the advice of this commission, can use it for whatever is considered the biggest needs.
County Executive Demo.
Yeah, I just want to talk in that for a second. It seems to me the lost revenue is going to be the cleanest way going forward as far as reporting the money. And what we do, the 33.3 million is still up to us, and I think the spirit of ARPA should still be followed. But as far as the reporting guideline, I think it makes it a lot easier for us. Just about in any kind of emergency spending that I've seen, any kind of training I've gone through, whether it be disaster cleanup or what it is with FEMA, with emergency money, the federal government's really quick to give you the money as fast as possible. And then it seems to me they come back 6, 7, 8 years later and they do a full audit to pull every penny they can back. At least that's what FEMA seems to do. So I think this makes it the cleanest for us for when that audit were to come in the future, that we can allocate every single penny without an enormous amount of extra reporting and documentation that goes along if we do this project by project. If we do it this way and we still follow the spirit of ARPA, we can still do some great things. We will have a longer timeline to accomplish these things. It'll give us a wider scope of things that we can actually address. But if we go to the ARPA way, and any kind of project we do, all the bidding, all the receipts, everything that has to do with the project, we're going to have to do some extensive reporting. So for me, it's very clear that we could take this all as net or lost revenue. And some counties may just pay off all their debt. If that's their purview, that's fine. I think that we should do the easiest way for us to report this going forward to make it, I guess, as sure as possible that none of this money will be clawed back in the future, but still navigate this $33 million in the spirit of ARPA.
Anyone else have any questions or anything right now? Okay. Supervisor Cox.
Yes. then you'll have at least two answers to the audit. You'll have answer one, that you have utilized the money according to the losses that we have in business losses. We'll say. And then you have answer number two, which would be to the individual projects that we identify as an ongoing thing that we end up financing through our own ability to finance. And we can still claim those as ARPA funds because they meet the definition. Correct?
I would direct the reporting part of that to Director Collard. I'm not quite sure of the reporting aspect. It's the administrative aspect on the backside of this is where my concern is why it makes the loss revenue tempting.
Yeah, if I can answer that second part, we won't have to report further to the Treasury Department.
But you're done.
That's my heart monitor.
No, it's one of our people on Zoom. The second part I was saying will not need to be reported to the Treasury Department. It'll be internal. So we can handle that internally and set up our own separate accounting for it, which we will maintain, I expect. And then just make disbursements according to county board, which will make budget amendments as if we were spending money out of the general fund.
So as a primary directive, you would define all of the money as lost revenue. You would do your math that justifies how you came up with that, and we'd be covered really for any future expenditure, whether you rolled it back into the budget or whether you use it for individual projects.
Yeah, we will have to report on paper what we used it for, but the regulations say we can report any category of general government spending with a few exceptions. So I could take the payroll from the sheriff's department for the last 2 years and add the highway projects we've done for county roads, for instance, and all that will clearly be allowable. Just a lot of paperwork to file with the Treasury Department. And then we're just left with money essentially in our general fund.
Money that would be turned over into the general fund and allow you flexibility to do these various projects. What I was getting
Correct,
at was
correct.
the general projects as we're doing them would qualify specifically for ARPA funds if we wanted to stay within both roles in the event that you had, some doubt that you were going to be able to use, say, all 70% of the lost revenue in the business.
So I think it would be okay to even spend that money. I mean, that's correct about then determine what projects to use that money for. I don't know that it's required. I think it would not be required that they be the type of projects that are generally eligible for ARPA. It's certainly great if they are. Probably most of them would be.
And because it originates with ARPA rules, and because we're here for that purpose, we should really be looking primarily at all ARPA projects to gain, the values of the ARPA plan in terms of the projects we deem we want to get involved with. And then go from there with whatever leftover money that you have so I think it would be a lot safer if we did it, to identify and define the projects that we're doing as ARPA safe rather than on the fringe and then look back over our shoulder and we've got, a problem.
Sure.
So Supervisor Cox, I just want to just bring your attention back to this. And I think this was the intention of Executive Daniels, is to provide us a scope and direction in regards to the intent of how those dollars would be used. I think that's what this is. And I think what I hear you saying is that you want us to follow the intent of what ARPA was. They provided a document and direction that says that that's their intent as well. And that would guide us as this commission.
Yeah.
So,
I'd like to respond to that, and I agree, I kind of have a foot in both worlds here. Number one, I think we need to use this money for what the ARPA bill, what the spirit of the bill is. The $33.3 million should be spent to address the ways that our community suffered during this pandemic, and the ways that we could be better off as a people during what we saw, whatever that may be. The looking backwards is why I want to consider the lost revenue, because that's clear cut. Even the $10.35 million grant we got for homelessness, we are still working with the grant agreements with nonprofits and from the state. They have changed their language 3 times on that. We had the latest version of that was given to us last week, which we are now again renegotiating and looking at that. We're gonna have to go to the Department of Administration for some follow-up. So we are ready in August, hopefully in August, when the money gets here from the state for shovel-ready projects. Those are the things they keep changing the parameters over and over again. Like Director Collard said, last April, we finally got the final ruling on ARPA. Was this the?
It's what they're calling.
That's what they're calling the final ruling, right? And the rules keep changing. The rules have been pretty solid on the lost revenue, except the things that are now eligible for it. And I think the calculations, if we followed it directly, we could claim almost 50 million in lost revenue, even though we only have the 33.5. So claiming it as lost revenue is the easiest for us going forward to make sure we have all our T's crosses and I's dotted. But I would leave it to this commission to still consider that, even though it wouldn't be ARPA dollars anymore, it would now be general fund money transferred, that we still use that as the spirit of ARPA. So we'd be taking the strings off of it, but I think it behooves us and our citizens that we still use that money in that way.
Supervisor Peschel?
sure. So now if I heard Mr. Collard correctly, there'll be a resolution that goes to the county board that essentially calls for this lost revenue, call it lost revenue. And I guess in that resolution,
Well,
would it, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but just to clarify, I don't need county board action to call it lost revenue. In fact, I've already done that. I was
Okay.
required to do that by April.
Got it.
To say we're not taking, there's this $10 million standard allocation. I have to say whether I'm taking that or reporting the actual, and start reporting the actual in April. But I do need the county board to then say, we're then applying this to general government services, which we can then use to replace the money that would be freed up to spend as the commission and board directed for projects.
I think that feeds into what I was about to say, and I think it supports that. I think some of the message that's being talked about is that we reaffirm in that resolution that the dollars that are being created from that still be utilized. And we can maybe even put this right in the resolution that gives us that scope as well. So,
Supervisor Fari is next.
In listening to Mr. Cox, I'm thinking the same way. So what we're saying is we're gonna request the county board to allow us to take the funding and put it into a category, right? And you use the term general fund. Are we going to put this money into a specific isolated fund, or are you commingling this with all the county funds?
It's a very good point. I would think, first of all, I think it's our option. It's the county's option. I think the Treasury Department doesn't really care what we do with it after that, but if it's the commission's and the board's desire to track that money and it's used for projects consistent with the purposes of ARPA, which is what I'm hearing, that what I probably recommend is to establish a designated portion of the general fund. So it'll be part of
Such
the,
as the undesignated fund balance.
so the designated,
Yeah, another-
it would not be counted as part of the undesignated fund balance because we would designate it for
As
these
an
purposes.
example, it would be a separate fund, just sitting out there waiting for appropriation.
Technically, it would be not a separate fund, but a designated, separated portion of the fund.
Let me, can I,
Yeah, certainly, certainly.
what I was getting at was that we don't lose the restrictions that ARPA places on projects and on the money that we take in, because it is a looser rule to take it in on lost revenue than it is to bring it in and direct it to specific projects. Being that we're dealing with the federal government, with auditors out there that want to take a look at this, and they really want to look at the rules being kept as close to, the projects as they can be. So to open up a Pandora's box, so to speak, by saying, okay, but we've got all of this lost revenue, that we're gonna take it, and then we're gonna take the money and we're gonna put it into a designated fund balance that we can draw from for various projects. It loses the restrictions in the projects that we accept, because it has no restrictions. We think we already got the auditors in our direction to accept our lost revenue excuse.
Mhm.
That
I understand your point.
it just runs us right up one avenue without having any other.
It's good to have backup.
County Executive Demo.
Yeah, this requires a certain amount of trust. And some of those restrictions were not good. When I think of Supervisor Fari, he had an idea of land conservation, water conservation, because a lot of people went to the parks during the pandemic. It was the one thing that was open. People would go out and go on the water and be separate and enjoy life. He had a resolution. He was considering having some money set aside to get setbacks, I believe, for farmers, to increase the water qualities of our waterways. That being said, during the spirit of ARPA, it has to be spent by 2026. And when we got together with Chad Casper, he wasn't sure if we could get that done long enough. The span of it wasn't long enough for it to be effective. This would take some of those timeframes off for us and allow us to have a program like that it's better. So, and yes, it gives us a little bit looser guidelines as far as ARPA, but to Supervisor Fari's idea, that would be beneficial to the program that we're trying to do, that would better the quality of our water for a long time. And since that was a resource people took advantage of during COVID, I think it would fit the spirit of this very nicely. However, the timeline was prohibitive of what you wanted to do.
And that's very well said. We'll get into that down the road,
Yeah.
legacy issue and everything. Certainly, I think that initiative is very well founded. But if I might, Chairman, back to the point here, my concern will be that we don't commingle these funds with any other government funds. So it's an isolated fund with which we will appropriate funds with county board approval for certain specific legacy, using your term, initiatives. Would I be correct with my statement?
Well, yes, that would be fine. That's certainly something we can do and probably would do unless the board wanted to use it differently.
And I think that addresses your point, sir.
Just but because you have a specific excuse, we'll say, for taking all of them and setting it aside because we have that much lost revenue. We can't, in all honesty, we can't forgive ourselves of the restrictions that were out there for various projects and take on all kinds of projects that don't have restrictions simply because we've got another nest egg, a large quantity of money. You have to have some silo of this ARPA funds set aside if you're going to do it in that manner. And you have to go back and take a look at each one of the projects and make sure that they fall within the guidelines, the restricted guidelines of the federal government and the ARPA program. Then you have something sitting on the edge that maybe doesn't have all of the necessary requirements, but we own money now. But you can accept that. That would be malfeasance. It sounds to me like from the outside. You know, we're all sitting here, all friends, all understanding and everything else. But as it's pulled apart by the newspapers, it's pulled apart by various people who didn't get a share, didn't get into the first tranche or whatever. They're going to try to find any reason in the world put their need out there.
What I'm hearing from the committee, those that have spoken and those that haven't, please speak up, is that you would rather have this kept as a separate, just so it's just this pile of money right here. That's the way you want it left. Am I correct?
If we're using Mike's lost revenue program here to snatch the money and run, we have to silo it. We have to have the restrictions go along with that silo of money so that we stay within. God help us if we get in with an auditor that doesn't like that program.
So we want that money as a silo, as you call it, but all that's left, so we know where that money is and how much we have left to spend at the end.
Right. It should be monitored.
Anybody else have any other feelings that they wish to go along with that?
I mean, the final remark for me, I would agree with the idea that we need to stick with the spirit of ARPA. I would disagree by saying that the actual mode of using the ARPA reporting and everything is going to be better off. There's less risk if we claim it all as lost revenue. There's less administrative costs long-term if we use it all in lost revenue. We are covered better if we use it all in lost revenue and then simply put this money in a separate fund and use it in the spirit of ARPA. We have less risk of being audited in the future and having some of that money clawed back. I think it solidifies it. But the board is going to have to trust this commission, and we're going to have to trust each other to make sure we're doing the right thing with it. Like I said, there are counties out there that can most likely take this all as lost revenue to pay off their debt and be done with it. ARPA money spent. Not really what, I'm sure that's what you would like us to do because it would be easier as the administrative end, but that's not what we're going to do. We have to look at projects that are really help where we struggle. And the ARPA money is going to be more strict on allowing us to help entities or stakeholders in our community than it would be if it was just funneled through us directly. So I guess, I think that makes sense. Interested in putting this in a separate fund, hopefully as lost revenue, just make sure it doesn't commingle with our undesignated fund, correct?
Just so all of a sudden we're spending more money and so we're dipping into that pot, there are other pots sitting over here. I don't want to see that either.
If I might, Chairman, I think what Mr. Cox is saying, and I somewhat agree with it. Okay, we get the board to approve that we're gonna use it as lost revenue. We put it in a separate segregated fund. But when we draw funds from there, it needs to be in the spirit of our, is what you're saying.
That, whatever project that we get involved with, wherever it is.
Yeah, as identified in documents, previous documents, at least with the intent to do that. I think there might be areas where it might be a little outside of that, but certainly that would be our intent going in and understanding.
Yeah,
I'm sympathetic to what you're saying, but I suppose we should have a little flexibility there. I think, in my opinion, based on what I've heard, the executive's comment about legacy programs generally fall within the criteria of our. I think those counties that throw the money away to pay off debt are outside of the original intent. But if we get into projects that we're gonna fund long-term for a legacy, that are gonna be there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, I think that would be the intent, hopefully, of this commission.
Yeah. Much like the federal government set all these rules up when they came up with ARPA, we're gonna do the same thing when we put this money in fund. We'll be able to put whatever rules and guidelines that we feel fit on there, and if they mirror most of these, then they mirror most of these. All I'm suggesting is we claim this as lost revenue. I think we do put it in fund, and then when we get to 4, we will further discuss how people come, how we allocate that. And I think this commission is going to set up those rules exactly just like the federal government set up the rules for ARPA. So we'll be able to clearly put some guidelines on that. So it won't be able to be spent in other means, correct, Mike? I think we can do that to the point where we're not tying a future board's hands though, correct?
Well, we can announce the board's intent to spend it for certain categories of projects or with a certain purpose in mind. That doesn't bind this board or the next board, but it establishes the ground rules that people proposing projects would need to know in order to know whether they should be bringing a proposal to us.
you have a list here of 6 items in the resolution that kind of define.
What document are you looking at?
This is the resolution, 196/08/2021. And there are 6 items in here, or 6 line items that I think are defining the general project of the recovery fund, the general.
No, we don't have one of them.
Where did we get it from?
Oh, this was included when I sent out this is the resolution accepting the first tranche, 16 million.
Right.
And I included it when I sent out the agenda, but I didn't print copies for the group today.
Okay. Those line items, all 6 of them, should have consideration within the type of projects that
I would say 1 through 5.
1 through 5.
Right.
Well, 6 is the lost revenue, so.
But by using this as kind of as a guideline, it would seem that we can pick up basic projects that need attention. And they would fall within the confines of what the federal auditors would clearly see as acceptable.
I don't know what you're talking about. Could you read?
Well,
it?
You have it up, Tom, so I don't know what you're talking about.
May I, Mr. Chairman, I think it helps.
go ahead.
The 6 items referenced in that resolution are the 6 items that are described in a lot more detail in the pamphlet, the overview that I handed out. So if you look at that between pages 6 and 15, you know, on page 6, there's the major heading responding to public and health and negative economic impacts. That's numbers 1 and 2 on the what Supervisor Cox was referring to, and that's covered pages 5 through 10 of the overview. And the capital expenditures, which is also included, that's pages 11, or just page 11, premium pay for essential workers, which was item 4 on the resolution, is page 12. Water and sewer infrastructure, number 5 is covered on page 13. Broadband infrastructure is on page 14. And that's about it. So basically those same 5 categories, 6 categories are what's covered in more detail in that overview.
So this is in shorthand, more or less. By having that project, there's a side of projects that you're going to be involved with. Whether you go the route Mike would like to go, you still need to take your projects past this. And say, okay, this is here. I wouldn't think that you'd have some sort of engineering project that needed extra money or whatever that you pull into this if it didn't qualify. So I guess this is the program that I need to stay with regard to the projects that we accept. Even if we have a pot of money out there that we're going to be pulling from to pay for the projects that has already been guaranteed that it qualifies because it's lost revenue for the county.
Supervisor Worter?
You were happy to be Lindsay. This is gonna be a quagmire. And what I get an email from Fox Valley. We got that too. Now, is that NIF grant? Is that different?
Yeah.
So here we have now an example where people are expecting, and they thought we promised them, or at least Ethan did, $400,000 that they didn't get. This is just the beginning, I think, of it. You know, how are you going to segregate all this and keep it from bleeding off? And then you take it to the board. Are they going to want to redesign the whole system?
That's what I was getting at earlier.
That's exactly it. I mean, that's the point. There are a lot of people that got missed. Oshkosh went for $6 million of their own, that none of them got anything. And a lot of great organizations that didn't get anything. Its capacity as it went, our health department for some reason pulled them up and they wrote the grant and put the Oshkosh Habitat. We had been working with the Fox Valley Habitat the whole time. Matter of fact, they're the ones that made us aware of the neighborhood improvement grant. There's going to be a whole lot of other really well-deserving organizations that are going to come and ask for some money on this, that did some really amazing things during COVID. I can think of both the Boys and Girls Club here in Oshkosh and the Brigade in Neenah Menasha that did wonderful things for kids during COVID. That being said, this commission has no authority to spend any of this money. Any project that we refer to the board in whole is going to have to agree to. So I think if this commission were to put something forward that seems ridiculous and not within the spirit of ARPA, I don't see our county board passing that. All we are is to recommend that and to listen as best we can to our stakeholders in our communities, so we don't have 7 presentations at county board, correct? It's a smaller group for us to really listen to these programs and see which ones are we going to recommend to our board, who has the authority to allocate the money, projects that are worthy in this. And the one thing I haven't heard in this group is that nobody feels like we should just throw the spirit of ARPA away. Everybody, I think, so far is in agreement that this is something that we need to make sure that we're doing, that we're, as Supervisor Borkhardt said, spreading the peanut butter a little bit evenly across the bread. And I think that's something this commission will do well, which is why I was, when I picked my people, is why I'm still waiting for somebody who's right in Nina, so that we have all areas of our county representative. We have our towns, we have Fox Crossing, Menasha, I want Nina, Oshkosh, and then Winnebago, Butamore, Amro-ish, so that our entire county is represented.
So in this memo where it says Ethan promised them they have a placeholder for $400,000, is there $400,000 placeholder someplace in the county for them?
It was a miscommunication. We told them that that's what we wanted when we went for that $10.35 million. And we had a whole bunch of other things. Again, the workload that I have on a daily basis is the point where I can't micromanage each of these projects. So as a communication breakdown somewhere between human services and health in my office, when they went for Habitat for Humanity, they just went for the Oshkosh Habitat for Humanity, who is also deserving, and not the Fox cities.
John, this person is from Oshkosh, but is talking about Fox cities, that she sits on the board.
Sure, I don't know the email you're talking about.
I don't
Well,
know.
Ethan sent it out November 8th, so you can get it from him.
Okay,
I'd give it to you if I know how to do it, but I don't know how to use it.
sure.
Dr. Collier, do we have something?
Well, I was just going to say that I thought Supervisor Borchardt's comment provided a great segue into really what's item number 4 on the agenda, which is discussion of strategic planning. How are we going to determine the highest priorities, and how we're going to figure out, well, first of all, collect proposals for projects, but then figure out really how to score them or how to evaluate them, how to make sure that we're recommending the most effective spending requests. So maybe we can start out with that. I mean, I think very good point when you're looking at 33 million. And I do want to clarify one point. The $10.3 million neighborhood improvement fund grant. I think that may be, I didn't have that, I don't have that email, but
Whatever NIF.
but I think that's what it's talking about, what we were often calling the homelessness grant. That is technically a part of ARPA, but it's an entirely different part of ARPA. It's not part of the SLFRF. It's money the state got from the ARPA funds, unconnected to really what the $33 million fund is. So just to clarify that.
So how do you keep that clarified? We were going through, I thought $1 was $1, but I'm wrong. It's different kinds of dollars in different pots.
Well,
Different ARPA dollars.
the 33 million is ARPA dollars that's coming straight from the US Treasury to us. The neighborhood improvement fund homelessness grant is money that's coming from the federal government to the state, and then the state decides how to spend it, and decided to spend $10.3 million on our proposals for 7 different homelessness projects.
Can I?
That doesn't stop them. That does not stop the individuals from speaking up that they didn't get a part of it. No.
Yeah, but that's
Not at all.
$10.35 million less requests that we will get this commission. That is $10.35 million less of pressure that we're going to have in this board for $33.5 million.
Right, working.
Just.
No, you're absolutely right. And so how are we going to make these decisions? I think we need to have some planning, have to have
and what's been happening at our board meetings is they'll sit down and the board will take apart everything they're doing and redesign it. And I don't think we can have that happen with ARPA funds. It's gotta come from this committee and it's gotta be vetted through this committee. And when it's submitted to them, hopefully it's gonna be 100% approved by this committee, and we can't have people changing it. It ain't gonna work. And then you might as well not have this committee if they're gonna take it.
Well, and I had stuff. I'll speak out of turn. We're gonna be back and forth.
I'll just say on that, that was decided by the board though, that they wanted everything to come back to them, that we could not, as far as the committee, go ahead and spend it. So that was
The proposal, but I hate to see our board spend time on the menu at Fox Valley Tech or University of Oshkosh. That is not going in the right direction.
He's saying it can't be amended. Once we bring it forward, he's suggesting it should not be amended by the board. Take it or leave it, yes or no? That's what you're saying, right?
I don't, this is what this committee has to come in, because you've got to support it 100% when it goes through committee.
Correct.
And there could be some long sessions here of somebody not supporting what's going on until they get online, and we're gonna have to speak as support for it, but then it's gotta kind of go through and somebody's gonna try to do that. We have the right, we can change it, but that's just gonna blow it. But again, it could be these special silo dollars that we're talking about, not other stuff.
Well, yeah.
Director Collard?
Well, I think that one way to at least partially avoid the problem Supervisor Borchert has identified is to do more strategic planning. I think that means what we do is you focus first on the big picture. You focus first on the goal. What does the county want to accomplish with the money? The easy way to do it is to send out a notice saying all spending requests or project requests are due in Mike Collard's office by this date, this time, and then we look through them, we start fly specking them and tearing them apart and, quibbling over them and eventually submitting them to the board. But then it's kind of random. I think, in my opinion, a better approach is start with evaluating what the overall needs of the county are that are unmet, that fall within the county's role. And then look for the projects that will let us meet that goal. That way, it's not just kind of wide open and random, we miss this or miss that, but if we decide, main focus of the county should be on meeting mental health needs, we look for projects that address the mental health needs, because that's what our strategy is.
Are we going after those projects, or are they submitting to us?
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Because I kind of like that idea, the fact that you give a general, in order to qualify, you need these qualifications,
Mhm.
and then the board will consider it.
Supervisor Petrol?
Sure. So I actually have a little bit of experience in this, and just to be very honest with you guys, I used to be a member of COVI, one of the 5 organizations. And so I actually wrote the proposal that COVI put into that $10.3 million. So not only do I have that experience, I also had the experience of writing such proposals for other counties, because COVI operates in other counties as well, in other cities and such like that. And so I'd like us not to focus on so much in redefining the process. The process is kind of out there already. There are several counties that have already said, this is what we're going, this is the process that we want organizations. We only have to look up a half mile up the street. A year ago, the city of Oshkosh held a forum where you could propose, the public could come in and propose ideas to the city on how they spend it. These are roadmaps that we can utilize already. We don't have to think long and hard on what that process should be, because it's already being done. We should create, my opinion, we should create an application that people can put in a basic proposal. And we should have a couple public sessions where the public can come in and tell us ideas and proposals. That gives us direction of organizations to go talk to and to build partnerships and collaboration about. So I think some of the information is already out there. We don't really have to look that far. We just have to talk to some of our partners. And then my other point, and Mr. Collard, it actually speaks to your point, and John, you and I have had lots of conversations about it, and Mr. Collard, we have conversations about it, and I've sat on 2 boards of government that, in the time that I've been sitting on them, they've created strategic plans for that government. And so I'm going to suggest that we look inwardly and allocate, no matter what, allocate a portion of these ARPA dollars. And they can still be built around the premise of ARPA as well, in creating that strategic plan for the county. Because that strategic plan is going to do a couple different things. It's going to give Mr. Executive here direction. It's going to give his team direction. And it's going to give the county board direction. And that direction's all going to be aligned together. Meaning that John can't go off on his own. John will need to stick within that strategic plan and that strategic direction. And the challenge that I see with this is that we're 20 years behind on making this strategic plan. So I feel when I look at other governments and other county boards, county governments across the country, we're missing out on real opportunities to be on the same page, whether it's a highest elected leader in the county, a collection of us as elected leaders, and the administration that does all of that work. So if there's one thing that I would put all my money on for our success as a county is to create the strategic plan. So that's something we don't even have to ask. We can actually lead with that. We can lead with that. The county's already said, and I'm not gonna put a number on it because I don't know what the number is. We're gonna use some of these dollars that were provided to us. We're not talking about it being ARPA dollars anymore. We're talking about it being designated funds in the spirit of ARPA to create a strategic direction for the county. So process, it's out there. I think we just have to inform Mr. Collard of what process we really like. The other thing that I would like to, is I'd like us to create a timeline. The timeline creates a level of expectation. Putting in Mr. Collard's request for, the acknowledgement of lost revenues, creating a timeline when that comes to the board, it creates goals for us. When we create that, the methods for soliciting the public, methods for soliciting the business community, nonprofit community for all this. Let's set a timeline that holds us to a certain expectation. And then what that does is it also sends a message to our community that it's a transparent message that this is what we're shooting towards. So I'm going to stop.
Supervisor Cox.
Well, I'm certain that there's a need for a strategy, and I'm certain that there's a need for a timeline on that. I think we all need to give agree in a direction and stick to it. I think bringing more people into the mix as far as what kind of projects we're going to be involved with. It isn't all just about a few of us finding key projects in the county, but there are a variety of different municipalities and towns that have their projects that they would like to have within this. There is also lost revenue in various towns and various municipalities that we should be looking at, as well as our own lost revenue, in a way to keep as much of this money siloed as we want. So as much money as we can in order to have a stockpile where we can go and build out on more projects. To my mind, we have to be listening to build a strategy and listening to all of the communities.
Vice President, do you have something?
Thank you. Yes, in responding to your comments, I partially agree with what you said, but I believe you made the comment that we would allocate a portion of these funds with ARPA intent. So I assume you mean the balance of whatever that portion would be open to public requests for those funds. I think I would be very concerned about that. I think we should adhere to the ARPA intent for the entire. And I'm a little concerned about opening it up for public requests. To your point,
Yeah.
I'm aware the town of Vinland is struggling to buy a new fire truck. $560,000, that truck. So if we were to propose, or I was, well, let's fund that truck. You got 15 towns in this town. So we need to be very cautious about allowing public requests or municipal requests for this funding also. I really like the focus that Mr. Collard has proposed. We need to perhaps do this plan and identify the broader scope of that plan and the criteria that would go into that scope. I think that might be a little better process.
I did want to mention regarding Supervisor Heschel's comment that strategic planning is an identified purpose for ARPA funds in the ARPA regulations. So I wouldn't consider that to be outside the scope of the intent of ARPA at all. In fact, it specifically allow use ARPA funds for strategic planning purposes in the early regulations.
So put a number to it, please.
Throw a number out, but it's just a number then.
Yeah, yeah,
you know,
No, I mean, let's find out what that sweet spot is for that number.
Yeah, I mean, the original draft of the resolution, for instance, which was amended, and I believe $175,000 allocation for planning purposes and data collection and analysis.
Yeah, and to that, the $175,000 also had a ARPA specialist was
Yes.
supposed to do that as well, somebody to kind of manage that. But to both your points, I think you're right. I think the fire truck was a great example. And you don't even have to get to the truck, you just talk about the radios. And we all know the story about the radios right now. 10 years ago, we purchased radios for everybody in the county. And with the agreement that they all spend their money to buy the radios, and here we are 10 years later, people are asking for money. Now, we need to be fair amongst all municipalities. So the NIDA Police Department bought the radios, they paid for it. The National Police Department, and I believe Fire Department, don't quote me on that, I believe saved their money and bought the radios. Oshkosh Fire Department saved their money and bought the radios. Now, that being said, it's a much bigger bill when you're talking about towns. As far as public comment, I want to make sure we're as transparent and open as possible. But if we have public comment here, all we're going to get is a bunch of people from Oshkosh. It's been really hard for someone from Nepiska to get out here to public comment. So I would like to be able to have us at least lean on our townships and our municipalities to let us know what their asks are. I think we all agree that the best way to go about this, because some towns and municipalities also got their own ARPA monies, is to figure out ways we can partner. So maybe the town of Vinland has some money for a fire truck and maybe we don't buy the whole thing. But maybe we can come up with there with 75,000. You know, it doesn't all have to be all or nothing. But are there ways for us to partner with our townships and our cities and our municipalities so that we can put money together and we can go as far as possible?
Would the term matching funds be appropriate?
Sure.
you made a statement earlier that we are all from the entire county. Each one of us have a representative area that we come from. Mine being Fox Crossing, I ran right away to George Dearborn and said, what do we need? What can we do? What kind of projects? Well, he gave me a little list. I gave him the bottom part of this so that he had something to work from. And I think it behooves each one of us to contact our constituent areas and see what is really needed and get a priority list. Get our strategy in line with our priority list so we know how to father all these projects and still, stay within the ARPA rules enough so that we don't get caught with a silo full of money and we didn't do it right.
I believe when the city of Oshkosh alone did their open public session, they had over $90 million of requests come in. For just Oshkosh, over 90 million was their request. So we opened that up countywide. We're gonna be well above 33 million.
Yeah. So it wouldn't, if you've got requests out there already, and if somebody's got a Santa Claus list somewhere, take from those Santa Claus lists that you get from wherever. Mine happens to be here with Fox Crossing, and bring those together so we can take a look at whole thing with some sort of.
Hey, I agree with you there, but it's nice in the Santa Claus list, but I represent 4.5 towns, so when they all want their fire truck. Yes, Tom.
One of the things we talked about and the word came up, trust. The first time I've heard this in 2.5 years. We're new at this meeting. We have ability to set up that, and we're gonna have to work together to be trustworthy. It takes a long time to develop trust, a short time to do. So whatever we're gonna do, we have to have a plan, but we gotta kind of keep it together, keep it in a room, and make a plan that works, because otherwise, this is gonna get really ugly fast. Like the example we have on Habitat, what happened?
I do know. I don't know if it's appropriate for this because it's.
Okay, well, because, I'm going, how in the world did that happen? And in the letter, when you read it, they're bookmarked for $400,000. They didn't get it. That screwed them up. So that being said, trust.
Yep. Another thing too, I would encourage is that when we're looking at municipalities to partner up with, don't forget that Winnebago County is an entity too. We can't forget ourselves, and I think the strategic plan is a part of that. Maybe some of these owls that we're thinking of, that we got to think of ways that we are more accessible to our public as well.
And then, but that, that concept, if you look at our larger municipalities in our county, that's what they're following. They're thinking of what their municipal needs are first. And then they've allocated a portion of those dollars to go towards like community needs and to solicit proposals, which I think we could make the argument that we've solicited proposals with the use of ARPA dollars and that are the dollars at the 10.3. So the idea that we've already done that, and we can think inwardly in regards to what the county's needs are. I think we're in a good spot in that way already. But we're also in a unique spot where we can look at how these funds, I forgot what the wording was, but looking at impacted or disproportionately impacted, communities and such within our community. That's your straight, ARPA language right there. So, and I think that brings a little bit more definition to what we can do when we start looking at it that way, because that's a language that I used to hear a lot in the housing industry, in the low income housing industry, and, you know, people who are challenged with housing insecurity. So it's just an opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to think about how we really want to use these funds. Do we want to use them just to cover municipal needs? Do we want to do that? And then also a combination of creating some funds that can be accessed for people that are experiencing challenges. We have a huge opportunity here. I mean, I've got a page and a half list of things that I would like to, you know, already discuss, because like you, I've already talked to some of my constituents and stuff like that. But I think we have to define what that process is going to be first before we start having that conversation. You know, Habitat for Humanity jumped the gun already because of that. I understand your notion on trust, and it's totally understood. But they jumped the gun. We haven't even begun the process. We haven't even set out that process of what it looks like to start discussing with organizations about how they might be able to request a notation. So I think it's really important that we find out, part of it is our scope. You know, and I want to come back to this. The scope is a guiding principle of how we want to operate. You know, and I think this is a good start to that. But I think this should guide us into where we want to go next, and then also should guide our next steps of where what we want our process to be. I don't know that we're going to define what that process is going to be today. So, but I think it's something we have to reflect upon, how we want that process to be. So.
They're all good ideas, but do we start for what we want the county to have first? That portion of the county which we should spend on the county, and how many dollars are left over from there, and then divide out from there. It's something that maybe that's another way to look at it. Start there.
I think that's a great idea, actually, because I think there are impacted programs within our county services that these dollars could help, right? I mean, again, I'm going to stray away from defining programs at this point, because right now we're about what the process should be. So, and I think that's a good way of looking at it, and that leads us internally, right, to have discussions with our departments and some of our internal and external stakeholders about what can we solve by using some of these dollars. So I think that's probably should be our first step, is to define what that process will look like. And that probably comes to you.
Well, I think another thing too that we're gonna have to look into, kind of what we're seeing in the neighborhood improvement fund right now. For somebody who's not a county entity or a municipality, the grant agreements are pretty specific. We're gonna have the same things, we're gonna need the same things for us. Outside of ARPA dollar, there are still public purpose statutes out there in the state that limit us. We're gonna have to make sure that ARPA dollars does not make those magically go away. We're gonna have to make sure that that's all part of it. What does that look like? A receipt? How do you bill for an eighth of a fire truck? I'm sure it's been done. But we're gonna have to figure out, you know, how we do that, and the reporting that we will require to make sure that people are giving any money that we give them the correct way. And I do like the idea of matching funds, municipality. I love the idea of figuring out percentage, what is county, maybe what are municipalities or stakeholders, and what are maybe nonprofits, if that be. One of the projects that we're gonna do, but how also what kind of requirements are we gonna have them to report to us to make sure that they're doing the right thing.
But as part of that, I think you need to establish our own internal tranches, and you look at the categories that we can spend money on. You know, nonprofits should get 20%, 10%, 5%. Impacted industries, tourism, trails, parks, capital expenditures. It's one-time money, so you don't spend one-time money on operating expenses, for instance. And maybe you want to pay rate. I mean, just do a set of, you know, guidelines, not hard set numbers, but then we know, and maybe $2 million for fire trucks, and everybody gets 50,000. I don't know how that works, but something that just guides us along the way before we get too far into this.
Well, I am still, my own mind at least focused a little bit more on how are we going to determine needs rather than how are we going to solicit specific proposals. You know, because if we say, you know, solicit proposals, give us your proposals, then we'll get, you know, town of Inland will make a proposal to buy a fire truck. But if we decide, oh, there's a need for better fire protection throughout the county, then we can look at that in a more comprehensive basis and say, what are our guideposts going to be? What's the goal? How can we best meet that overall goal of increasing fire protection in the county? And then we'll eventually drill down to here's town of Inland's allocation for, you know, fire equipment, or we want to see more sharing of fire equipment, or, you know, take a variety of approaches that would be the most effective. But in my mind, you can't do that until you've decided that fire protection is an overall need in the county. And I'm just using that as an example, obviously. So it seems to me that before we develop an application and put it out there and, you know, figure out who's going to submit things, we should better define what we want done by identifying really what the unmet needs of the county's population are. You know, so how can we, I don't know if you agree with that, but that's the approach I would like to take. And, you know, if that's what we want to do, how are we going to, we should really be thinking of a process to identify the needs.
I agree, and that's, we've got 171,000 Winnebago County residents, it's their taxpayer money. You want to benefit all 171,000 people as much as you can, so you want to find what the greatest need is and highest benefit, but that's an impossible task for guys like us to do. And then when I was president of US Bank, I'd get a budget and I'd get somebody begging for money every week, and I had to figure out how to do it. Towards the end of the year, you don't have any money left, and it's a hard thing to do. You never can do that right.
I mean, there's lots of different ways that we can solicit that type of information, right? But you know, the idea is the constructive data that comes from that type of information. So you know, I don't know the best way to answer that. To me, I'd want a multi-tier approach that tells me, because when you're in the silo, let's just say Winnebago County is one silo, right? And we all have our operations, our departments have all their needs and such. But then let's say we ask the general citizens of the county, let's just say like in a survey, and they give us all of that information. It's going to be completely different, right? So the idea of soliciting the public's input on something that they may have a completely different view of what the county should be doing in general, and that might be the feedback we get, you know. But the reality is that finding a way to balance out that type of approach, I think, is really, really beneficial to us, because it's really easy for your departments to get all that information of what are the county's needs, you know. But it's more of a challenge to solicit what is the public really, how does the public want us to prioritize? You know, maybe that's what we ask them. You come forward with a whole bunch of things or ideas. Winnebago County, tell us how to, you know, give us some priorities. To me, that's also back into like long-term planning and strategic planning. So.
And I agree, that's a difficult part, because the executive could dress up as Santa Claus and go to his department heads and say, hi, I'm Santa Claus, what do you need?
Yeah.
They'd spend it all too.
Yeah, so I mean, if we're gonna set him up, we gotta set him up to be successful, not lose. So we can't just send somebody in and say, what do you want? I at lost how you do that. I want everything.
Well, isn't the answer to that question and dilemma defined by the ARPA criteria?
No. Only because when we do.
We're opening it up,
Right, you're opening up the loss.
but that doesn't prohibit us from using it.
Correct. Correct. And another thing I would say, and well, for this half of the table, not so, and in Conley over there, we're a republic. I mean, we got elected by our people to represent them, to make decisions for them. And I think that that's our task. These are the hard decisions we're gonna have to make for whatever the best direction of the county is. No matter what we get for public input, at the end of the meeting, we're gonna have to decide which ones we recommend going forward.
There's always gonna be somebody hurt.
Always.
They didn't get what they want.
Yeah.
And there are always gonna be somebody, like this letter that we got, Katie, where.
Yeah.
Here,
$6 million worth of projects that were worthy in Oshkosh, and they did not get their wish. Me and Menasha both got their neighborhood grant agreement wishes. They both got theirs. The city of Oshkosh did not. They're the only ones in the county that got denied. So there's gonna be people. Whatever, we're gonna do some good with these things.
but you can make up for those that were denied by going back over it again and saying, okay, we didn't get it last time, we got to do something this time. And all of those kind of things have to come from the people that are sitting in this room, one more or whatever. But otherwise, you're asking 36 people on the board to make that decision for you, and you're gonna have 36 different answers. And everybody's gonna want it in their direction. You gotta make it as fair as you can, but there's always gonna be somebody who is gonna like it, no matter what you do. So,
So we decided to make a plan.
Yes, we did.
I want to bring it back to Mr. Collard's. Because I really liked Tom's suggestion of creating like a percentage across certain areas. But I wanted to come back to what your basic premise was, and mind you, it's not in my head, but I know it's important right now. Can you just state what you were wanting again?
Well, and I think most recently I was responding to Tom's comment about, setting out percentages and guidelines as to how to apportion the money in general categories. And I think you were starting to talk about, how much for nonprofits, how much for municipalities and so forth. And I was really thinking more to identify the general categories of need, for instance, and to set up the categories that way. In other words, if we set out, maybe the fire, protection was too specific an example, but if I'm looking at some of the ARPA things, okay, negative economic impacts to small businesses. That's one of the categories set out in ARPA. Just use that as an example. We might decide, what is the priority of ameliorating those impacts to small businesses, and what percentage of the 33 million should we use for that? And then after we've decided, basically, we're going to use 5 million of the 33 for that purpose, then we can kind of drill down. It doesn't really matter to me if it's, best provided by a nonprofit or by another municipality or entirely different group or through county departments directly. It matters that we've allocated that money to that need. So I think that's the starting point.
That'd be a way to avoid, definitely you want to, but direct public contact. If you're just defining the need, then there's no stakeholder group that's going to complain about the need that they're.
Well, it kind of does, but it definitely have to solicit public input and be open process for soliciting proposals. But I think the more focused we can make them, the less we'll struggle. In other words, it won't just be random long list of $90 million worth of projects, and we spend 10 minutes talking about the fire engine in town of Vinland, and then the next 10 minutes we spend talking about homelessness and in Nina. It could be kind of random that way, and then you worry about who's falling through the cracks. But if we say, here's a category we want to address, here's a category of needs we want to address, let's look at those as a group, then you could say, well, these two really meet the same need, let's make them partners, or this one will be more efficient than that way of addressing that need. And I think we'll be a little more focused in deliberation.
Thoughts?
I think maybe it's well, I think both of you had a really good direction. I think we could find a way to merge the two ideas. So maybe, you know, for next meeting, if we could put a couple of those on paper for us to take a look at, discuss that, or kind of process it a little bit further. I don't know, offline, we do that. We're all elected officials, so we look at other people that actually do that. But to put some proposals forward, I don't know if you would feel comfortable doing that. If we would be okay with that?
How often are we gonna have this meeting?
That's next, yeah.
I would like to see you though, go ahead and see what you think, something the county's got
Sure.
to have this couldn't, I mean, that would have to come out of your office.
Mhm.
Something that, boom, this is gonna affect the county, it's gonna, we're gonna have to do something with it or whatever.
Yep.
And maybe you come up with some big proposals, because there's no sense sitting here and arguing over
Correct.
33 million and there are 33, and then go ahead and say, well, geez, the county can use 20 of it.
Oh,
So
well,
can we find a best practices comparative with, you know, Rock County, when, you know, Outagamie, Marathon, some other counties that are already past where we are? See what they've done, or is that bad?
we can, but all counties are in
Relative, yeah.
tens of thousands as far as spends. Outagamie County did something really easy. They did small grants for small businesses. As far as the big percentages of the money, nobody's really moved on it. Like Mike said, the final agreement, ultimate final agreement, whatever it's called, just came out last April. So people are still kind of going through that.
I guess I'm willing to work with Tom and Mike to create, you know, that percentage and general areas of need. Kind of work on that.
Or at least a list to work from and have the
Yeah,
Yeah,
commission
there's a starting point, it's a guideline.
develop the percentages, you know. And I'm also trying to think about the timeline, how to put that together, because there are probably gonna be several different tracks, you know. Part of he's gonna be working on the lost revenue, just to get the ducks in a row there. You know, well, we should do that right away, but that doesn't mean we're gonna stop other things. Obviously, most of the discussion has been on what the eventual use of the money will be.
Well, it works out to $200 per resident, so we start from there, and then we go up to $34 million to just one person. So it's somewhere in between those two parameters.
$200 a head, let's go.
right.
We're done. Well, and something to think about early is, do we want to proceed with supervisor's suggestion about strategic planning, which could, you know, basically mean we hire someone, a project employee for 2 years to do both, you know, a coordination of the ARPA funds project and, you know, under my direction and John's direction, as well as, you know, kind of moving from that into a strategic plan for the county overall.
Well, and then outcomes, I think some of it is, some of our programs were clearly working during COVID and some of them weren't. I mean, we need to take a look at some of the programs we have in our county and figure out which ones we're wasting money on and stop doing that so we can focus on the ones that are doing well. Is that a part of it? I don't know.
So, but just to clarify, it's not just about whether they're making money or not, it's about how efficient.
Whether they're effective, that's what I meant.
Right.
Whether they're.
Because we lose money a lot
effectively spending their money.
on programs that are very effective.
That would probably have would be enough to start with.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Well, you gotta have a list of those
What?
programs you're referring to.
Yeah. We don't effectively measure outcomes yet. We're way away from that.
But if you're gonna hire somebody to work on it, you gotta have.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So just a thought here, could we suggest that for our next meeting, whenever we schedule that Mike or Mr. Collard or Mr. Day will come back with a proposal for a strategic planning initiative for the county?
I think a strategic planning initiative we can do, I think a couple different variations of percentages as far as maybe kind of merging the ideas of priorities, what we want to do, and maybe areas, whether that be county, towns, municipalities.
I think we should just worry about the county now, see what money's left over. See what
Just worry about
counties-
counties, okay.
Right, and then we know how much money's
I
left.
agree with that one.
Okay.
I think that is primarily what I'm hearing.
right?
Yeah.
To address the county issues. The money was appropriated to this county.
Agreed.
And we take care of that needs, and then what is beyond that.
I think that fits into, I think that fits, sorry, Chuck. I think that fits into what Tom is suggesting too, and into what Mike is suggesting in regards to figuring out what those unmet needs are. Because we can categorize them once, you know, we've created those categories. And once you provide that information to us, that'll help us kind of determine percentages as well.
The county has a balanced budget, so it's not like you're clawing back too much, other than you probably gave retro pay raises or things that you could claw back as ARPA impacts.
We didn't pass a balanced budget last year.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Right, and it's gonna be even tougher this year.
Okay, well, yeah, that is,
Yep.
that's first priority.
We, not that it wasn't important, we gave more to our insurance, our sheriff's department than we had in that new construction. And then last year's budget.
This is county's money, so.
Well, I'm looking at my calendar and I'm free on Friday.
Let's go back to, so how often are we meeting? That's a very good question.
Are you gonna meet once a month or what's?
I would say once a month for now.
For now,
Yeah.
And I would say this day of the month really worked well for me. And
Sure.
it just happened to fall, I had nothing else.
But one thought, if we want to potentially refer a resolution to the county board. Our board agenda went out yesterday.
Yeah, you're looking at.
So I think it would be advantageous to have a meeting before the county board agendas come out.
But you need 10 days.
So what are we looking at,
You
second
need
Tuesday?
10 days, just like any other committee. Before the agenda is made, you have to have at least 10 days to pull all of the stuff.
Yeah, so we're gonna stick with Tuesday. We're really looking at first Tuesday rather than second, because the second is
Yes,
not,
to meet that.
it's too close to the county
Yeah,
board, which is
We're looking at
Any
the
other
second
committee?
day of August.
Meetings, any conflicts there?
On the first Tuesdays?
No, I
Well,
don't have it.
we have to have unanimous agreement to have this before 3 o'clock, correct?
You want to have it.
Three
We
works for me.
decided a date, yep.
Some of us will be judging them.
Great.
Oh, at the fair?
Fair week,
Oh, that's
Nice.
fair week. Okay, yeah, well, that.
but that's just judging, like Tom said, he'll be judging.
Well, this is forward ones.
Great.
I can judge them.
The first Tuesday in August is
Second.
the second. Otherwise, and then this, I think it's the 16th is the first.
The first Monday, which would be the first of that work for this following month.
We can adjust later though, right? Because it's not like we're gonna have board action for August or are we?
Yeah, no.
No, we might.
I would say let's come back to timeline. You know, I would say let's plan for some type of board action in September. Because if we come back in August, some of the stuff might be new to some of us and might not be ready to move on yet. So I would say let's plan for like an early meeting in September so that we can get the stuff on the board meeting in September.
Does this board have to meet at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or? can we make
That's the
that-
other thing, so.
We have to have unanimous consent to move it before 3.
So I mean, if we did it at 9 o'clock in the morning. Is there people that, you don't get up by then?
That's early.
Probably not over by that.
It's like the retired banker.
Retired baker?
Yeah.
When we worked, it was 9 o'clock in the morning. What?
Well, are we then?
What were you doing, about next month?
yeah, two months seems like a
What I'm
long
hearing,
time.
we'll
That's a
go
long
the
time.
ninth then, right?
Yeah, let's
Either the
just,
ninth, the
yeah,
second Tuesday.
let's do a 30 days from today, a
It would
meeting.
be the ninth
Then readjust
of
from there.
August.
Any
Now,
time.
the time is 3 o'clock. Bad for everybody?
Is that all right with everyone?
That's fine.
It's 3
I
o'clock.
can't look into the future right now.
It's
So,
fine for me, you know, so.
You want to make it 2 o'clock?
August 2nd?
Huh?
You wanna make it 2
August
o'clock?
August 9th.
Oh,
August 9th.
August 9th.
yeah, August 9th.
2 o'clock.
Well, is it all right with everyone here? We've got all but The one that
So,
you're missing.
yeah,
Is everyone all right?
I have to be honest, that is the 1 week in August that I may be on a family vacation. So,
That's the.
Perfect, lock it in.
Oh, yeah, lock it in.
But,
Zoom.
I mean, I can come in through Zoom. I don't have a problem with that. So, but I may be on a beach and you guys might be very jealous.
Well, that is gonna be
We do have a lot of executive budget meetings in August too, so moving it earlier in the day would probably be an issue.
Right.
The 3 o'clock works because we don't do the budget
Yep.
meetings that way.
Well, what do you guys think? We have to have a
August
So
9th,
I'm saying
3
3 o'clock on the 9th is
August
good
9th
as
at
far as I'm
3.
concerned.
If you can be here, fine. If you can't, you zoom in or.
Works for me, you know, we're in here.
Is it all right with everyone then? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That part is carried.
What do I call this, ARPA meeting?
ARPA stretch, Outcomes and Strategy Commission.
Not AARP.
We have a motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, carried. We are adjourned.
Second.
Cox.
Okay. I'll reach out. I don't know.